The night
Stay with
Caleb
me.
stopped
Help is
walking,
almost here.
he had
God,
no
I'm so
phone, no
scared.
I
plan,
know.
and nowhere left to go. He was 16 years old and he had been moving north for 2 days on a highway that didn't care whether he lived or died. And the truth was that nobody else cared either. He had $14 folded flat against his ankle inside his left sock. He had a split lip that hadn't finished healing from the last thing that happened at the group home, the thing that finally made his feet decide before his brain could argue. He had electrical tape wrapped twice around his right shoe where the sole had started pulling away from the upper, and every step made a small peeling sound against the asphalt that reminded him the tape wouldn't hold forever. He had been walking for 6 hours when the sound stopped him. It came from somewhere below the highway, low and metallic and wrong. Not the sound of impact. The sound of something already broken shifting under its own weight, settling deeper into the shape it would hold forever. Metal giving way to gravity one last time. Caleb felt it in his back teeth before his brain could name it. His feet stopped, not because he decided to stop, but because his body received the information before his mind could argue with it. He stood on the shoulder of the highway and looked into the dark below. The embankment sloped down from the shoulder, maybe 20 feet of loose gravel and dead brush, and at the bottom, caught against a concrete barrier, was a car. Or what had been a car. It was on its side now, the driver's end demolished, steam rising from the engine in slow pale threads that curled up into the cold night air and disappeared into nothing. The kind of steam that comes from something that was working hard a few minutes ago and has now stopped working permanently. Caleb looked at it. He looked at the empty road behind him. Tucson was 48 hours in the wrong direction. The group home was somewhere back there too, the one run by a woman named Lenora who had forgotten his birthday 3 years in a row. Not because she was cruel, but because forgetting was easier than remembering. And Caleb had spent his entire life making it easy for people to forget him. He had perfected invisibility the way other kids perfected sports or schoolwork. He could walk through a building and leave no trace that he had ever been there. He looked at the empty road ahead of him. More highway, more nothing, more dark. He looked back at the demolished car in the ditch. He thought about how this was not his problem, how he had no phone, how he had his own survival to think about, and whatever was down there in that wreck had nothing to do with him and never would. He stood there for one breath, just one, and then his feet moved toward the embankment before the rest of him had finished the argument. The same way they had moved him out of the group home 2 nights ago. The same way they always moved ahead of his brain, ahead of his fear, ahead of every reasonable thought that told him to stay where he was and mind his own business and keep walking and survive. He scrambled down with one hand out for balance, gravel sliding under his shoes, the electrical tape catching on rocks and pulling slightly with each step. The smell hit him first, hot metal and something sweet and chemical. The smell of fluids that were supposed to stay inside an engine now spreading across the dirt in dark patterns he couldn't see clearly. The heat from the engine pressed against his face, even from 10 feet away, and he could hear the tick of cooling metal, that steady rhythmic clicking that happens when something hot starts dying. He moved around to the side of the wreck that wasn't completely crushed and got down on his stomach and pressed his face almost to the dirt and looked into the gap beneath the demolished frame. 2 eyes looked back at him. She was young, maybe 19, maybe 20. Blood had dried above her left eyebrow. Her face was pale in a way that went beyond skin tone. Her left arm was pinned under something he couldn't see clearly in the dark, wedged between the collapsed dashboard and the steering column. But what Caleb saw first, before the blood, before the arm, before any of it, was her stomach. Round and full and so large, it seemed impossible she had fit into that car at all. 8 months of life sitting right there in the gap beneath a demolished car on an empty highway in the middle of the night. Her breathing came in short, careful intervals, not panicked, measured, like someone rationing the last of something, counting each breath before spending it. Caleb was 16 years old. He had no phone, no training, no medical knowledge, no idea what to do with a pregnant woman trapped under a demolished car. He had $14 and a split lip, and electrical tape on his shoe, and a lifetime of being the person nobody noticed. So he did the only thing available to him. He reached his hand through the gap toward hers. "I'm here," he said. "I see you. I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him with eyes that were trying to stay open through what had to be a tremendous amount of pain. And in those eyes was something that grabbed him by the chest and did not let go. It wasn't fear. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't relief. It was something harder than all of those things. Something that had been forged in the time she had been lying there alone in the dark. She had decided to trust him. A total stranger on an empty road in the dark with nothing to go on but the sound of his voice. She had decided. Sloan, she said. Her voice was barely there, air shaped into words that cost her something to produce. She gave him her name like she was handing over something valuable and hoping he wouldn't drop it. Caleb, he said back. How long have you been here? He asked. Long enough to count. Count what? She didn't answer right away. Every 40 seconds or so, her face tightened, and she breathed through something Caleb had no name for, but recognized instinctively as pain that had been happening for a while. Not new pain, established pain. The kind that has settled in and made itself comfortable and shows no sign of leaving. The cars, she said finally. 4 cars passed before you. I watched their headlights from down here. I counted every one. Caleb went completely still when she said that. 4 sets of headlights. 4 drivers who saw the wreck or didn't see it or saw it and decided it wasn't their problem. And she had lain there in the cold and the dark and counted each one. The first one, she continued, I thought was stopping. I saw the headlights slow down. But they kept going, just slowed down enough to look and then kept going. Her free hand moved to her stomach, not gripping it, just touching it, checking. By the 3rd car, she said, and her voice changed, then dropped into something lower, something that Caleb would carry with him for years afterward. I stopped praying for someone to save me. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't dare. I started praying that if no one came in time for me, someone would come in time for her. Her hand pressed flat against her stomach. I started talking to her, telling her things. The things you tell someone when you think you might not get another chance. The air between them changed. Caleb felt it shift, felt the weight of what she was saying settle into the ground around them like something that would leave a mark. What things, he asked, because he needed her to keep talking. Sloan was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke in sentences that cost her breath she didn't have to spare. I told her about her grandmother, the way she used to sing when she was cooking. I told her about the backyard and the clothesline and the way the sheets smelled in summer. The things that matter. She paused, breathed through another wave of pain. I told her that if I wasn't there when she came into the world, it wasn't because I didn't fight. It was because the world didn't send anyone to help me fight. Caleb's throat closed. Something was building in his chest that he didn't have a name for. Not anger exactly, something older than anger, something that sits underneath it and holds it up. And then the 4th car came, Sloan said, and went. And after that, I stopped talking to her. I just held my stomach and waited. Not for help, just waited. I'm here now, Caleb said. His voice came out rough. I know. She almost smiled. It was a terrible broken thing, but it was real. How far along, he asked. 8 months, almost. He did the math without wanting to, too early. Not dangerously early, maybe, but early. He didn't say this out loud. The burning smell was getting slightly stronger. Not smoke yet, just heat getting into things it shouldn't be getting into. The sweet chemical smell underneath it was the kind of smell that preceded worse smells, and Caleb knew without knowing how he knew that they were on a clock. He glanced toward the front of the wreck and then back at Sloan. He didn't mention the smell. He just shifted slightly closer, putting himself between her and the engine. I'm going to get you out of here, he said. I promise. I know, she said. And the certainty in her voice was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment Caleb actually believed he could deliver on that promise. Then reality came back. He had no phone. The road was empty. The smell was getting worse. Listen to me, Sloan said, and her voice changed. The pain was still there, but something else moved underneath, something sharp and commanding. You need to go back up to the road. Stand in the middle of the highway and don't move until someone stops. What if no one comes? Someone will come. The problem isn't that they don't come. The problem is that they don't stop. So you make them stop. You stand in the middle of that road and you don't move. Not when the headlights get close. Not when you hear the engine. You make them choose between stopping and hitting a kid. She was 19 years old, pinned under a demolished car, 8 months pregnant, and she was giving him orders with the calm precision of someone who had thought 3 steps ahead while he was still standing on step 1. And Caleb. She squeezed his hand once. Hard. Come back. Don't leave with them. Come back down here and stay with me until the ambulance comes. I need your voice. Yeah, he said. I can do that. He let go of her hand and climbed back up the embankment. He stood on the shoulder of the highway and looked both ways. Empty. He stepped into the center of the road with both arms out wide the way Sloan had told him, and he waited. 3 minutes passed, then 5, then 8. Then finally, far in the distance, a single pair of headlights appeared, moving fast. Too fast. Caleb did not move. The headlights got brighter, closer. He could hear the engine now. He could feel the wind the car was pushing ahead of it. Every instinct screamed at him to jump, to dive, to survive. He did not move. The car's brakes screamed. The tires bit into the asphalt. The vehicle lurched to a stop 6 feet from where Caleb stood, with his arms still out and his heart slamming against his ribs. The driver's window came down. A man's face appeared, already red, already shouting something about what the hell did this kid think he was doing, standing in the middle of a goddamn highway at night. Caleb pointed to the ditch. There's a pregnant woman trapped under that car, he said. His voice was steady. He didn't know how. She's been there long enough to count 4 cars that didn't stop. You're the 5th, so you're going to call 911 right now, or I'm not moving, and neither are you. The anger left the man's face. It just drained right out of it like water through a crack, and what replaced it was something rawer and more complicated. The man grabbed his phone. Caleb didn't wait to hear the call. He turned and went back down the embankment, sliding through the gravel, and found the gap and reached his hand through and found Sloan's fingers waiting for him. He stopped, Caleb said. I heard the brakes, Sloan replied, and something in her face released. Not relief exactly, something deeper, the tension of a gamble that had paid off. You were right, Caleb said. He stopped. I told you, most people will stop if you make it impossible not to. The ambulance came 19 minutes later. Caleb counted every one of them from his knees on the cold gravel, with his hand reaching through the gap. He talked to Sloan the whole time the way she had asked him to. He told her about the group home, about Lenora and her missed birthdays, about the fluorescent light in the hallway that flickered and no one fixed it for 3 years, about the ceiling fan in his room that was broken and stayed broken because fixing things for invisible kids wasn't anyone's priority, about the $14 in his sock, in the road he had been walking, in the nowhere he had been heading. Small things, stupid things, things that meant nothing and everything, because they were proof that there was still a normal world out there, and she was still connected to it. And while he talked, Sloan listened. Not passively. She listened the way someone listens when they are filing information away for later, when they are building a picture of someone from the scraps they are being given. When the paramedics arrived, they moved fast and loud and efficient. They had tools that cut through metal and hands that worked with practice speed. They got the door open. They got Sloan onto a board. They stabilized her arm. They monitored the baby. They moved with the kind of choreographed urgency that comes from training and repetition and the knowledge that every second matters. Caleb stood back and watched. There was nothing for him to do now. The professionals were here, the people with phones and training and equipment and the authority to fix things. He was just a kid again, just a bystander, just someone in the way. Just before the ambulance doors closed, Sloan turned her head and looked directly at Caleb. He was standing there in the dark with dirt on his knees and exhaustion in every part of him, and the electrical tape on his shoe finally giving up its grip entirely. She didn't say thank you. She said something better. She said his name. Just that, just Caleb. Like she was making sure she would remember it. Like it was something she needed to carry with her into whatever came next. The doors closed. The ambulance pulled away. The lights disappeared down the highway, red and white, getting smaller and smaller until they were gone. And then there was just Caleb in the wreck, in the empty road, and the man who had stopped, still sitting in his car with his hands on the wheel, and a look on his face like he was trying to figure out what had just happened to his evening. Caleb walked back up to the road. The man rolled his window down. Thank you for stopping, Caleb said. The man shook his head slowly. I almost didn't, he said. I almost went around you. I saw you standing there and my first thought was that you were crazy. And my second thought was that going around you was easier than stopping. And my third thought, he stopped, swallowed. My third thought was, what if that was my daughter down there? But you stopped, Caleb said. Yeah, I stopped. The man looked at him for a long moment. Something passed across his face that might have been shame, or might have been the complicated thing that happens when you realize you almost failed a test you didn't know you were taking. Then he drove away. And Caleb stood alone on the highway with the specific feeling of someone who had just done something that mattered and had no idea yet how much. He didn't go back to walking north. He sat down on the embankment and pulled his knees up and wrapped his arms around them and sat there in the cold watching the empty road. He kept thinking about Sloan's face in the gap beneath that car. The way she had given him orders when she was the one pinned down. The way she had said his name before the doors closed. An hour passed, maybe more. Then headlights appeared in the distance. Not one set, multiple. A line of them coming from the south. Motorcycles. All of them, moving in a tight formation, their engines creating a sound that built and built until it filled the entire night. They slowed as they approached the wreck. Then they stopped. All of them. Engines cutting off one after another until the silence that replaced them felt heavier than the noise had been. Men climbed off the bikes, big men in leather vests with patches on the back that Caleb couldn't read in the dark, but could feel the weight of. One of them had a flashlight. He swept the beam across the demolished car, crouched down, and looked into the gap where Sloan had been. Then he stood up and looked directly at Caleb. The man walked toward him, slow, deliberate. He stopped 6 feet away and looked at Caleb, taking him in. The electrical tape on his shoe, the dirt on his knees, the split lip, the backpack. You the one who called it in? It wasn't a question. Caleb nodded. Then he turned to the others and said something Caleb couldn't hear. 2 of them got back on their bikes' engines firing and took off south. The rest stayed. The man with the flashlight turned back to Caleb. What's your name? Caleb. How'd you find her? I was walking. I heard the metal. She say anything to you? Caleb hesitated. He didn't know who these men were or what their connection to Sloan was, but something about the way the man asked the question told Caleb that the truth was the only option. She said 4 cars passed her before I stopped. She counted them. The man's jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, something colder. 4, he repeated. He looked at the empty highway stretching out in both directions, at the place where 4 different drivers had kept going. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question that changed everything. You got somewhere to be right now? Caleb almost said yes, instinct, self-preservation. But the truth was he had nowhere to be, and lying felt worse than the truth. No, Caleb said. The man nodded once. You eat today, not yet. The man turned and said something to the others. One of them went to his bike and came back with a bag. Inside was a sandwich wrapped in foil, a bottle of water, and a pack of crackers. Eat, the man said. Caleb sat on the embankment and ate. He didn't realize how hungry he was until the first bite. His body reminded him he hadn't eaten anything substantial in almost 2 days. He ate slowly, trying not to look like he was starving, even though he absolutely was. The men stood near their bikes, talking in low voices. Every so often, one of them would glance over. Not staring, just checking. Caleb finished the sandwich and felt more human than he had in hours. The man walked back over. She's my president's daughter, he said. Caleb looked up. He didn't know what president meant here, but he understood it was important. Is she going to be okay? Don't know yet. They took her to St. Luke's. That's where we're headed. The man studied him. You got a phone? No. Anyone know where you are? No. How old are you? 16. Something shifted in the air between them. You run from something or to something. Caleb thought about the group home and Lenora and the ceiling fan, and the night everything went still. From, he said. The man nodded like he understood. Then he held out his hand. Name's Harlan, he said. Caleb stood up and shook it. Harlan's grip was firm and brief and carried the weight of a decision being made. You're coming with us, Harlan said. It wasn't a question. Caleb opened his mouth to say something, maybe to ask why, maybe to say he didn't need help. Maybe to do what he always did, which was to say no thank you and walk away before anyone could get close enough to be disappointed by him. But Harlan spoke first. "The girl you pulled out of that car," he said, his voice quiet now. "That girl is the only family my president has left in this world. Her and the baby she's carrying. So when he finds out what you did tonight, he's going to want to meet you. And trust me, you want to be somewhere we can find you when that happens." The way Harlan said it made something cold move down Caleb's spine. "What happens if I'm not?" Caleb asked. Harlan looked at him for a long moment. "Then we spend however long it takes looking," he said, "and that's not a road you want us going down." Caleb stood very still. His heart was doing something complicated in his chest. Fear and something else. Something that felt almost like the opposite of fear. The feeling you get when someone tells you that you matter enough to be found. One of the other men called out something from the bikes. Harlan turned and nodded. "We're rolling," he said to Caleb. "You're riding with me. We'll get you sorted at the hospital." Caleb looked at his backpack on the ground, at the empty highway stretching north, at the wreck in the ditch where everything had changed. He thought about the road ahead and the nothing at the end of it. He thought about Sloan saying his name before the doors closed. Then he looked at Harlan and made a decision that he wouldn't fully understand the weight of until much later. "Okay, well," he said. Harlan nodded once and walked back to his bike. Caleb picked up his backpack and followed. The engine roared to life beneath him. Harlan told him where to put his hands. Caleb wrapped his arms around the man's torso and felt the bike lurch forward. And suddenly they were moving, the highway peeling away beneath them. The wind cold and sharp against his face. The sound of engines all around him as the formation closed up and moved as one, a single entity, made of metal and leather and noise. Behind them, the wreck getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely into the dark. And somewhere ahead in a hospital Caleb had never seen in a waiting room, he couldn't picture a man he had never met was about to find out that his daughter was alive because a 16-year-old nobody with $14 in electrical tape on his shoe had decided to stop. The hospital parking lot looked like a convention of shadows and chrome. Caleb counted 30 bikes before he stopped counting. They filled every available space near the entrance, lined up in perfect rows like soldiers at attention, their metal gleaming under the yellow parking lot lights. More were still arriving. He could hear them in the distance, that low rolling thunder approaching from multiple directions. Harlan cut the engine and Caleb climbed off. His legs were stiff. His hands were numb from gripping. He had never been on a motorcycle before tonight, and his body was reminding him of that fact in every possible way. "Stay close," Harlan said. It wasn't a suggestion. They walked toward the entrance. The automatic door slid open and the fluorescent light of the hospital lobby hit Caleb like a physical thing after so many hours in the dark. He squinted against it and followed Harlan inside. The waiting room was already full. Men in leather vests moved through the space with a quiet purpose that made the air feel heavier. They didn't talk loud. They didn't talk much at all. They just filled the room the way water fills a container, taking up every available space until there was no space left. Caleb counted 40, then 50, then stopped counting because the number kept climbing and counting felt pointless. He stayed close to Harlan. He kept his head down and his hands in his pockets and tried very hard to be invisible. It was the skill he had spent most of his life perfecting, and he deployed it now out of pure instinct. But he could feel eyes on him. Quick glances from men who noticed the kid walking in with Harlan and were trying to figure out what that meant. Harlan led him to a row of plastic chairs near the window and pointed. Caleb sat. Harlan remained standing, pulled out his phone, made a call. The conversation was brief and quiet. When he hung up, he looked down at Caleb. "He's 20 minutes out." "Who?" "The president, Sloan's father." Caleb's stomach did something complicated. He nodded and tried to look like that information didn't terrify him. Harlan walked away to talk to some of the other men. Caleb sat alone in the plastic chair and watched the room continue to fill. He had been in waiting rooms before. Social services, waiting rooms with plastic chairs just like these. Intake offices where someone decided which group home would take him next. Rooms where adults talked about him in hushed voices while he sat on the other side of a glass partition and pretended he couldn't hear. But those rooms had been empty and cold and administrative. This room was full of something he had never felt before. Purpose. Every man in this room was here for a reason, And the reason was the same, and they all knew it without having to say it. The hospital staff behind the desk kept glancing over with expressions caught between concern and confusion. They chose to let it happen. Whatever instinct governs self-preservation told them that calling security on 60 men in leather vests was not the winning move. A nurse came through the double doors, and the entire room went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The kind of immediate total attention that happens when people are waiting for news that matters more than anything else in the world. The nurse looked slightly overwhelmed by the sudden silence. She scanned the room and her eyes found Harlan. "She's stable," the nurse said. "The baby's stable. We're monitoring both of them, but right now everything looks good." The exhale that moved through the room was almost visible. Shoulders dropped, jaws unclenched. Men who had been holding themselves tight let go of whatever they had been gripping inside. It was the sound of collective relief, the sound a family makes when the worst thing didn't happen. And Caleb understood something then that he hadn't understood before. These men were a family, not blood, something else. Something chosen and built and maintained through years of showing up for each other in moments exactly like this one. They were bound by something Caleb didn't have a name for, something he had never experienced. Something he was watching from the outside through the gauze of his plastic chair by the window. And he was not part of it. He was just a kid who happened to be in the right place at the right time and would probably be forgotten about by tomorrow. That thought should have been comforting. It wasn't. The main doors opened. Caleb watched through the window as 3 more riders pulled up. 2 he didn't recognize. The 3rd he knew immediately, even though he had never seen the man before. Sloan's father. Something about the way the man moved, the way the other 2 flanked him, the way he paused outside the doors and looked up at the hospital like he was preparing himself. He was big, wide through the shoulders and chest, the kind of build that comes from years of hard work and harder living. His hair was dark with gray at the temples. His face was lined in a way that made it impossible to guess his age. The years had marked him, but they hadn't softened him. He walked through the doors and men stood up, a general rising a show of respect that happened as naturally as breathing. His eyes moved across the room, then landed on Harlan. Harlan walked over. They spoke quietly. Then Harlan pointed directly at Caleb. Every cell in Caleb's body told him to run. He didn't. Sloan's father's eyes found him and stayed there, taking in the electrical tape, the dirt, the split lip, the backpack. Then he turned and walked through the double doors to see his daughter. Caleb leaned forward in the plastic chair, pressed his palms against his knees, and stared at the floor until Harlan came back. "You scared?" Harlan asked. "Yeah." "Good, you should be, but not for the reason you think." Harlan was quiet for a moment. Most people go their whole lives never knowing if they matter. You're 16 years old and you already know. That's a dangerous thing to know that young. Because once you know you matter, you can't unknow it. 40 minutes passed. Then the double doors opened and Sloan's father came through. His eyes were red around the edges. He walked to Caleb. Caleb stood up. The man stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he was even bigger. His vest had patches, the largest one across his back said President. "She told me what you did," the man said. His voice was low, gravel in it. "She said you stayed with her, talked to her, kept her awake." "I didn't really do anything," Caleb said. "I just was there." She counted 4 cars, 4 sets of headlights that kept going. "You know what that does to a person." Caleb said nothing. "She's all I have," the man continued. "Her mothers have been gone 12 years. Sloan and that baby, they're everything." "How old are you?" 16. "Where's your people?" "Don't have any." "You got a place to go?" Caleb hesitated. He thought about lying, thought about saying yes, he had a place. He was fine. He didn't need anything from anyone, which was what he always said, because needing things from people was how you got hurt. But the lie wouldn't come. Not here. Not in front of this man, whose eyes had the weight of someone who had spent his life separating truth from everything else. "No," Caleb said quietly. The man nodded slowly, like that answer confirmed something he had already suspected. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled something out. He held it out to Caleb. Caleb looked down at it. A key. Small. The kind that opens a padlock or a locker or a toolbox. Not a house key, not a car key. Something simpler and harder to define. What is this? Caleb asked. It's a choice, the man said. Before Caleb could ask what that meant, before he could formulate any of the questions crowding his mind, a nurse pushed through the double doors and called out, "She's asking for both of you." The man turned toward the nurse. "Both," the nurse repeated, nodding. "She's asking for her father and for Caleb." Every person in that waiting room heard it. Every single one. The word both moving through the space like a stone dropped in still water, the ripples reaching every corner. And Caleb watched as something moved across the faces of 50 men all at once. A recognition, an understanding, a shift in how they were looking at him that he could feel even though he couldn't name it. Sloan's father turned back to Caleb. "Come on," he said. And Caleb, with the key still in his hand and absolutely no idea what it opened or what it meant or what he had just stepped into, followed the man through the double doors. The hallway was long and bright and too quiet. The nurse led them to a room at the end of the hall. 5 minutes, she needs rest. The room was small and filled with monitors beeping in rhythm. And in the bed propped up with pillows was Sloan. Cleaner now, smaller somehow, her left arm in a cast and IV in her right hand. But her eyes were the same, clear and focused and landing on Caleb the moment he stepped through the door. Her father went to her first. He moved to the side of the bed and took her hand carefully, like she was made of something that might break if he gripped too hard. He didn't say anything. He just stood there holding her hand and looking at her with an expression that was trying very hard to stay controlled and not entirely succeeding. "Dad," Sloan said softly, "I'm okay." Her father's jaw worked for a moment. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead and stayed there for a breath longer than necessary. When he straightened up, his eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "Don't ever do that to me again." "I'll try," she said, small smile. Barely there, but real. Then she looked past her father to Caleb. "Come here," she said. He walked over slowly. She looked at him for a long moment, checking to make sure he was real. "You came," she said. "They brought me. I didn't really, Tharma. You could have said no." "I don't think I could have," he said. She smiled, a real smile. "Thank you for stopping, for staying, for—" Her hand moved to her stomach, "for both of us." "The baby's okay," she continued. "They did an ultrasound. Everything's okay." "I told my dad what you did," Sloan said. "All of it. How you put yourself in the road, how you had no phone but stayed anyway, how you talked to me about electrical tape and group homes and kept me awake when all I wanted to do was close my eyes." She paused. "I also told him you're 16 and you're alone and you have nowhere to go." Caleb's eyes went immediately to her father. The man's expression hadn't changed, but something behind it had sharpened. "Sloan," Caleb started. "Don't," she said, firm, the same voice that had told him to stand in the middle of the highway, the voice that didn't ask. "Don't do that thing where you pretend you're fine. You stayed for me. Let me do this for you." "Do what?" Her father spoke then, his voice quiet but carrying weight that filled the entire room. "The key I gave you," he said. "It opens a room above a garage 2 miles from here. Place belongs to a man named Mercer. He knows you're coming. There's a bed, there's a shower, there's food in the fridge. You stay there as long as you need to." Caleb looked at the key in his hand, then back at the man. "I can't," Caleb said. "Why not?" "Because I don't take things from people." "This isn't charity," Sloan's father said. "This is a debt. You saved my daughter and my grandchild. That means everything in my world. I didn't do it for a reward. Is it this?" "I know, that's exactly why you're getting one." But Sloan spoke before he could argue. "Caleb, just take it, please. Let someone help you for once." "Okay," Caleb said quietly. Sloan's father nodded once. Something had been settled that couldn't be unsettled. Then Sloan's face changed. The softness left. The gratitude left. What replaced them was something colder, something sharper, something that made the air in the room shift completely. She looked at her father with eyes that Caleb recognized from the ditch, the eyes of someone who has already decided what happens next and is waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. "Dad," she said, "sit down." Her father looked at her. He didn't sit. He had the instinct of a man who knew that when his daughter used that tone, the next words were going to rearrange something. "The accident wasn't an accident," Sloan said. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Caleb felt them hit. Sloane's father went completely still. The monitors kept beeping. The fluorescent light kept humming. But inside the room, time stopped. "What are you saying?" His voice was barely controlled. "A black truck came up behind me on the highway, matched my speed for half a mile, then swerved into me, forced me off the road and into the barrier." Sloane's voice was steady, clinical, like she was reading a report instead of describing the night she almost died. "It wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was targeted. Sloan, I saw his face, Dad. In the rearview mirror, right before impact, I saw him." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Caleb had ever heard. "Who?" Sloane's father said. One word, loaded with everything. "His name is Garrett Sykes." The name hit the room like a gunshot. Caleb could see from the way Sloane's father's hands curled into fists that the name was not a surprise. It was a confirmation. "I saw him 2 weeks ago," Sloan continued, "parked outside the south side of our territory, watching. I told Harlan something was wrong. Nobody listened." The accusation was quiet, but it filled every corner of the room. "I didn't tell the police any of this," Sloan said. "I'm telling you first, because I want this handled our way, not their way." Her father looked at her for a long time. His daughter, 19 years old, lying in a hospital bed with a broken arm and a baby in her belly, and she was not asking for comfort. She was giving him intelligence. "Our way," he repeated. "My way," Sloan corrected. "I have a plan, but I need you to listen before you act. Can you do that?" The question hung in the air. Caleb stood frozen by the door, witnessing something he was not supposed to see, something private and dangerous and reshaping itself in real time. He understood standing there that he was watching a 19-year-old girl take control of a situation that most people twice her age wouldn't know how to handle. She was lying in a hospital bed with a broken arm and a baby in her belly, and she was the calmest person in the room. The nurse appeared in the doorway. "Time's up." Sloan looked at her father. "Tomorrow," she said. "We talk tomorrow. And Dad, don't do anything tonight. I mean it. Nothing until we talk. Promise me." Her father stood very still for a long moment. The muscles in his jaw worked. His hands opened and closed at his sides. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead again. "Tomorrow," he said. He straightened up and walked toward the door. Caleb started to follow, but Sloane's voice stopped him. "Caleb." He turned back. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something grateful and sad and certain all at once. "You're not invisible," she said. "I need you to know that. You're not invisible, and you never were." Caleb's throat closed. He nodded once. Then he followed her father out into the hallway. Sloane's father stopped and turned to face him. "My name is Boone. Harlan's going to take you to the garage. You get settled, you sleep. Tomorrow we figure out the rest." "What's the rest?" "That depends on my daughter," Boone said. The sound of a man who understood that the person thinking furthest ahead was the 19-year-old in the hospital bed. Boone put his hand on Caleb's shoulder. Not a grip, just a weight, steady and real. "You did good tonight," Boone said quietly. "You stopped, and that matters more than you know." He squeezed once, let go, and walked into the waiting room. Harlan appeared beside him. They walked out through the waiting room. Caleb kept his head down, but he could feel the eyes. Men who had heard the nurse say both. Men who had watched him walk into that room with their president. The ride took less than 10 minutes. Harlan pulled up in front of a small house with a detached garage and an external staircase leading to a second floor. The street light above cast a pale yellow circle on the gravel driveway. Everything was quiet. A different kind of quiet than the highway. This was the quiet of a place where people slept, where lives happened in small rooms behind closed doors, where morning came with routines and coffee and the sound of engines being started for the drive to work. Caleb climbed off his bike. He stood there with his backpack and the key and the feeling that his life had just split into before and after. "Harlan," Caleb said. "Yeah." "Why are you doing this, all of you?" Harlan looked at him for a long moment. The bike ticked softly as the engine cooled. "Because Sloan is family, and you saved family. That makes you something different now. Not family, not yet, but not a stranger either. Something in between. And we take care of the in-between until we figure out which way it goes." "Which way what goes?" "Whether you become one of us or you don't." Caleb stared at him. Harlan started the engine. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Why?" "Because Boone's calling a full chapel meeting at noon. Every patch member within 200 miles. And you're the reason why." "What's a chapel meeting?" "It's where we gather, all of us, to discuss things that matter to the club. To vote on things that change things." "Vote on what?" Harlan smiled. It wasn't a comforting smile. "On what to do about a 16-year-old runaway who saved the president's daughter and has nowhere else to go." He revved the engine once. "And on what to do about the man who put her in that ditch." The second sentence hit Caleb differently than the first, because the first was about him, and he was used to being discussed by people who held his fate in their hands. But the second was about Sloan, about the things she had said in that hospital room with her sharp eyes and her steady voice, about the accident that wasn't an accident, about Garrett Sykes. "Sleep well, kid," Harlan said. Then he pulled away. His taillight disappeared into the dark, and Caleb was left standing alone at the bottom of the stairs with a key in his hand and the growing realization that he had just stepped into something far bigger and more complicated than a room above a garage. Tomorrow at noon, hundreds of men were going to gather. They were going to vote on his fate. And somewhere out there in the dark, a man named Garrett Sykes was walking free, not knowing that a 19-year-old girl with a broken arm and a baby in her belly had seen his face and remembered his name and was already planning what came next. Caleb climbed the stairs. He unlocked the door. He stepped inside. The room was small and clean and had a working ceiling fan. He noticed the fan first. He stood in the doorway with his backpack still on his shoulder and stared up at it, turning slowly, the blades cutting through the air in a steady rhythm that was somehow louder than it should have been in the silence. He thought about his old room at the group home, about the broken fan that had never gotten fixed in the 3 years he lived there. He had asked Lenora about it once early on, back when he still believed that asking for things was worth the effort. She had written it down on a list. He had watched her write it. The list sat on her desk for 3 years, and the fan never moved. After a while, he stopped looking at it. Looking at a broken thing that no one was going to fix was just another way of reminding yourself where you stood in the order of things that mattered. This fan worked. That felt important. More important than a working ceiling fan should feel. He dropped his backpack on the floor. There was a bed with clean sheets, a small dresser, a bathroom with a shower that had water pressure. And on the table near the window, a bag of groceries: bread, peanut butter, apples, milk. Nothing fancy, just enough. Caleb sat down on the bed and put his face in his hands. He didn't cry. He had learned a long time ago that crying didn't change anything. But he sat there feeling something in his chest that was too big to name. Relief, maybe. Or the specific exhaustion that comes from holding yourself together for so long that you forget what it feels like to let go. He showered. He ate a sandwich standing at the counter. He climbed into bed and listened to the ceiling fan turn and felt the $14 still folded against his ankle inside his sock. He didn't take the money out. Not yet. It was the last proof that he had survived on his own, and letting go of it felt like letting go of something he might need again if all of this turned out to be temporary. But the sheets were clean, and the fan worked. And somewhere across town, in a hospital room with monitors beeping, a girl named Sloan was lying awake in the dark, not sleeping, not resting, but thinking, planning, moving pieces on a board that only she could see, getting ready for tomorrow. And Caleb, without knowing any of that, without knowing what was coming or how it would change, everything fell asleep within minutes. The kind of deep, dreamless sleep that happens when your body finally believes, even if your mind doesn't yet, that it might be safe enough to stop keeping watch. Caleb woke to sunlight and the sound of a phone buzzing on the dresser. He sat up confused, blinking against the brightness coming through the window. For 3 full seconds, he didn't know where he was. The bed was too clean. The room was too quiet. The air smelled like nothing, which was strange because the group home had always smelled like something: bleach, or microwave dinners, or the sharp chemical scent of the industrial cleaner Lenora bought in bulk from a catalog. Then everything came back. The highway, the wreck, Sloan's eyes in the dark, the motorcycles, the hospital, Boone's hand on his shoulder, the key. The phone kept buzzing. Caleb looked at it. It was sitting on the dresser next to a note written on a piece of paper torn from a notebook. The handwriting was square and deliberate. The note said, "Answer it." Caleb picked up the phone. He didn't recognize it. It was newer than anything he had ever owned, which wasn't saying much because he had never owned a phone at all. The screen showed an incoming call from a number with no name attached. He answered. Harlan's voice came through immediately. No greeting, no pleasantries. "You awake?" "Yeah." "Good. Be ready in 30 minutes. I'm picking you up." "For what? Chapel meeting? Remember?" Caleb's stomach dropped. He remembered. He wished he didn't. "I don't think I should go to that," he said. "Wasn't a request," Harlan replied. "Boone wants you there." "Why?" "Because you're what we're discussing. Seems fair you should be in the room." Harlan hung up before Caleb could argue. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed holding the phone and looking at the ceiling fan turning overhead and trying to control his breathing. A room full of bikers voting on what to do with him, deciding his worth, deciding his future. He had spent his entire life being discussed by people who held his fate in their hands. Caseworkers and social workers and intake coordinators who talked about him like he was a problem to be solved, or a file to be closed, or a line item on a budget that needed to be balanced. This felt different, but he didn't know if different meant better or just meant a new kind of pain he hadn't learned to brace for yet. He got dressed. He ate an apple because his stomach was too tight for anything else. He stood by the window and watched the street below until Harlan's bike pulled up exactly 30 minutes later. But before they left, Caleb did something he couldn't explain to himself. He walked into the small bathroom and looked at the ceiling fan through the doorway. It was still turning, working perfectly. And he opened the toolbox he had found under the sink the night before, took out a screwdriver, and tightened each of the 4 screws holding the fan blades to the motor housing. They didn't need tightening. The screws were fine. The fan was fine. Everything in this room worked exactly the way it was supposed to. But he tightened them anyway, because fixing things made him feel like he belonged somewhere. Because a room where you've repaired something, even something that wasn't broken, becomes a room that knows your hands. A room that has proof you were there. He put the screwdriver back and went downstairs. The ride to the meeting took 15 minutes. Harlan drove fast and didn't talk. The morning was bright and dry, the kind of Arizona morning where the heat is already building by 9 o'clock, and by noon the asphalt shimmers like water. They turned off the main road onto a side street lined with chain-link fences and corrugated metal buildings, the kind of industrial district that exists on the edges of every American city. Workshop after storage unit, after welding shop, all of them closed or barely opened, the economy of forgotten places. Harlan pulled up in front of a building that looked like an old warehouse. The exterior was unremarkable. Cinder block walls painted a color that might have once been white, but had given up the effort years ago. A metal door on the side. No sign, no markings, nothing to indicate what happened inside. But the bikes told the story. They were everywhere. Lined up along the fence, parked in rows across the gravel lot, filling every available space and spilling out onto the street. Caleb tried to count them and stopped at 100 because the number kept climbing and his chest was getting tighter with every bike he added. He could hear voices from inside, low and layered, the sound of a large number of men in a contained space, their conversations blending together into a single continuous hum that vibrated through the walls. Harlan led him through the side door. The space inside was larger than the exterior suggested. Concrete floors, fluorescent lights hanging from exposed steel beams, folding chairs arranged in rows facing a table at the front. The chairs are mostly full. Men sat in them with the particular stillness of people waiting for something they know is important. Others stood along the walls, arms crossed, leaning against the cinder blocks, with the casual tension of coiled springs. They turned when Caleb walked in. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough. A ripple of attention moving through the room as heads turned and eyes found the kid walking in behind Harlan. Caleb felt the weight of it like a hand on his chest. He kept his head down and followed Harlan's boots across the concrete. At the table in the front sat Boone. He looked different than he had at the hospital. More settled, more contained, like he had spent the night organizing whatever was happening inside him into something he could control. His vest was clean, his hair was combed, his hands were flat on the table in front of him, and Caleb noticed that they were completely still. Not a tremor, not a twitch. The hands of a man who had decided what he was going to do and was ready to do it. Next to Boone sat an older man with a gray beard that reached his chest and eyes that looked like they had seen the inside of every room in the world and found most of them disappointing. On Boone's other side sat a younger man, maybe 35, with tattoos running up his neck and onto his jaw, and a face that was handsome in a hard way, the kind of face that got things done and didn't apologize afterward. All three wore their vests. All three stopped their conversation when Caleb entered. Harlan pointed to a chair along the wall set apart from the rows. "Sit there. Don't talk unless you're asked a direct question." Caleb sat. The chair was cold metal. He put his hands on his knees and tried to make himself, tried to deploy the invisibility that had served him for 16 years. But it wasn't working. Not here. Not in a room full of men who had been trained to notice everything. The room gradually settled. Conversations died. The side door closed with a sound that carried finality. Someone in the back coughed once, and the cough echoed off the concrete in a way that reminded Caleb of how large the space was and how many people were in it. Boone stood up. The room went completely silent. Not the gradual quiet that happens when a speaker begins to talk. Immediate silence. The kind that gets manufactured by respect. Every voice stopped. Every movement stopped. Every breath got held for just a moment. "Most of you know why we're here," Boone said. His voice carried easily across the space without needing to be loud. It was a voice that had been doing this for years, filling rooms, holding attention, making decisions that landed on people's lives and stayed there. "For those who don't, I'll make it simple." He paused, let the silence do its work. "2 nights ago, my daughter was in a wreck. She was trapped. She was 8 months pregnant. She lay there in the dark and counted 4 cars that passed her without stopping. 4. She watched their headlights come and go, and not one of them pulled over." The room absorbed this. Caleb could feel it moving through the men, could feel the specific kind of anger that comes from hearing about something wrong happening to someone who belongs to you. "The 5th car stopped," Boone continued, "but it didn't stop on its own. It stopped because a 16-year-old kid put himself in the middle of the road and made it stop. That same kid had no phone, no plan, no reason to be there except that he heard something wrong and decided it was his problem. He climbed down into that ditch. He found my daughter. He stayed with her. He talked to her. He kept her awake until the ambulance came." Boone's eyes moved across the room. "Then they found Caleb. That kid is sitting right there," he said. "His name is Caleb. He's got no family, no place to go, and no one in this world looking for him. I brought him here because I want this club to decide what we do about that." The room stayed quiet. The weight of what Boone had said pressed down on the silence like something physical. The older man with the gray beard spoke first. "What are you asking for exactly?" Boone turned to face him. "I'm asking for a vote to bring him in. Not as a member, not yet, but as someone under our protection, someone we look out for, someone we give a shot to." The younger man with the tattoos leaned forward. "He's 16, he said. His voice was measured, careful. The voice of someone who understood the difference between questioning an idea and disrespecting the man who proposed it. That complicates things. I know. We take responsibility for a minor that opens doors we might not want open. I know that too. So what makes this different?" Boone was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The command in it was still there, but underneath it was something rawer. "Because my daughter told me something last night," he said. "She told me that when she was lying under that car in the dark, she didn't pray for someone to save her. She stopped praying for that after the 3rd car passed. She prayed that if she died, someone would find the baby in time. That someone would save her daughter, even if no one saved her." The room was so quiet, Caleb could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. And then this kid showed up. This nobody kid with $14 in his sock and tape on his shoe. And he stopped. And because he stopped, my daughter is alive and my grandchild is alive. So I'm asking this club to do for him what he did for me. To stop. To see him. To decide he's worth it. Boone sat down. The room breathed. Then a man stood up in the 3rd row from the front. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with a shaved head and shoulders built for labor. His vest had more patches than most. His face had the particular expression of someone who has earned the right to disagree with powerful men and knows it. "I need to say something," the man said. Boone nodded. "Go ahead, Dutton." Dutton looked at the room, not at Boone. He was talking to the membership, not to the president. Caleb understood the difference instinctively. He had watched enough adults talk over his head to know when someone was making a political move. I respect what this boy did, Dutton said. I do. I'm not standing up here to take anything away from that. What he did took guts, and I've got nothing but respect for guts. He paused, let the respect land, then shifted. But respect for one act doesn't change the math of what Boone is asking us to do. He's asking this club to take legal and moral responsibility for a 16-year-old minor, a runaway, a kid who walked out of a state facility and disappeared. Do you know what happens when CPS comes looking for that kid and finds him living under the protection of a motorcycle club? He let the question sit. Men shifted in their chairs. I'll tell you what happens. Investigations, scrutiny, social workers asking questions we don't want answered, police poking around our clubhouse, our businesses, our families, all because we decided to play foster home with someone else's ward. Dutton shook his head slowly. I've been in this club 25 years. I was here before some of you could ride. I've bled for this patch, for this. And I'm telling you right now, with all due respect to Boone and his family, that this isn't what this club does. We're not a shelter. We're not a charity. We're a brotherhood, and a brotherhood protects its own. That kid, he pointed at Caleb without looking at him, is not our own. The room split. Caleb could feel it happen like a crack running through glass. Some men were nodding. Others were looking at Boone. Others were looking at the floor because they didn't want to choose sides and knew they were about to be forced to. Dutton continued, Boone, I love you like a brother. You know that. But you're thinking with your heart right now, and that's dangerous for a president. Your daughter is safe. Your grandchild is safe. The boy did a good thing, and he should be thanked for it. Pay him, set him up somewhere, help him out. But don't bring him into this club, because the second you do, every decision we make from here on out gets filtered through the question of what happens to the kid. He sat down. The silence that followed was different from the silence after Boone's speech. This silence had fractures in it. Boone opened his mouth to respond. But before he could speak, the side door opened. Every head in the room turned. Sloan stood in the doorway. She was still wearing the hospital discharge band on her wrist. Her left arm was in a sling. She was wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, probably borrowed from a nurse or a friend, and her hair was pulled back in a way that showed the small line of stitches above her left eyebrow. Her right hand rested on her stomach, not gripping. Just resting the way it always did. She had discharged herself. Caleb could see it in the way she stood, the careful way she held her weight, the slight tremor in her legs that she was trying to hide. She should not have been standing. She should not have been here. She should have been in a hospital bed with monitors and nurses and doctors telling her to rest. But she was here. 300 men stared at her in absolute silence. Sloan walked forward. Each step was measured and deliberate, the walk of someone who knows exactly how much energy they have left and is spending it with precision. She didn't look at her father. She didn't look at Dutton. She looked at the room. All of it, every face. She stopped in the open space between the rows of chairs and the table at the front. She stood there for a moment, letting the room see her. The sling, the stitches, the stomach, the hospital band, the 19 years of a life that had almost ended 2 nights ago on a dark highway. My name is Sloan, she said. Most of you know me. Some of you watched me grow up. Some of you were at my mother's funeral when I was 7 years old. Her voice was steady, clear. No tremor, no hesitation, no plea. This was not a daughter asking for help. This was a strategist presenting a case. 2 nights ago, someone tried to kill me. Not in a random accident, not in a hit and run. Someone drove a black truck up behind me on the highway, matched my speed, and ran me off the road into a concrete barrier. They did this while I was 8 months pregnant. They did this knowing who I am and whose daughter I am. The air in the room changed. The fracture that Dutton had created didn't disappear, but something else moved through it, something cold and focused. The driver's name is Garrett Sykes. Murmurs, not loud but present. The name meant something to men in this room. Caleb could see it in the way bodies shifted and eyes narrowed. Sykes is not one of ours. He's connected to people who have been watching our territory for the last 2 months. I saw him myself 2 weeks ago parked on the south edge. I reported it to Harlan. She didn't look at Harlan when she said this. She didn't need to. The accusation was already in the room. Nobody followed up. Nobody took it seriously. And 2 weeks later, Sykes put me into a ditch. Sloan let that sit. Then she continued, Dutton is right about one thing. This club shouldn't take risks without a reason. So let me give you a reason. She turned slightly enough to include Dutton in her line of sight without appearing to address him directly. It was a move of such precise social calibration that Caleb felt something in his chest shift. She was 19. She was injured. She was running on whatever reserves a person has when everything has been spent and they are operating on will alone. And she was controlling this room. If someone attacks the president's daughter and nothing happens, Sloan said, what comes next? You know the answer. Everyone in this room knows the answer. What comes next is more attacks. What comes next is them deciding that this club doesn't protect its own. What comes next is a war that costs more than any of us can afford. She paused, breathed through something that looked like it hurt. But I'm not asking for war. I'm not asking for retaliation. I'm not asking any of you to do anything that puts a target on this club or puts anyone in a cell. What I'm asking for is smarter than that. She straightened her spine. Her voice found another gear. Caleb was the only person at that crash site before the ambulance arrived. He is the only civilian witness to the scene. The police report says it was a single vehicle accident. Hit and run, no suspect, no leads. That report is wrong, and Caleb's testimony is one of the pieces that can make it right. Not to our people, to federal investigators. The room went very still. I want Sykes arrested, not by us, by the people who can put him away for years. And I want the people behind him, the ones who sent him, taken apart the same way. Legally, permanently, in a way that doesn't put my father in prison and doesn't leave my daughter without a grandfather. She looked directly at Dutton now. You said this club isn't a charity. You're right. Protecting Caleb isn't charity. It's strategy. He's a witness. He's a piece of a case that can take down the people targeting this club. Sending him away because he's a minor is not caution. It's stupidity. And this club has never been stupid. Dutton stood up slowly. The room held its breath. You're 19 years old, Dutton said. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it had been recalibrated. He was no longer speaking to a girl. He was speaking to an opponent. You don't wear a patch. You've never sat in this room for a vote. You don't have standing to address chapel. Sloan looked at him with eyes that didn't waver. I don't need a patch to know who's targeting my family, she said. And I don't need standing to address chapel when I'm the one who is under that car. The room exhaled, not all at once, in pieces. Men who had been holding themselves rigid let go of something. Dutton stood there for a moment looking at Sloan with an expression Caleb couldn't read. Then he did something Caleb didn't expect. He nodded, just once. Not agreement, not surrender, but acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a man who recognizes when an argument has been made well enough that fighting it further would cost more than it was worth. Dutton sat down. Boone stood. We vote, he said, all in favor of placing Caleb under the protection of this club stand. Harlan was first. He rose from his spot against the back wall like he had been waiting for the word. Then the older man with the gray beard, then the younger one with the tattoos, then 5 more, then 10, then 20. Caleb watched them stand, one after another, row by row, the room rising like a tide. Not everyone at the same speed. Some men stood immediately, decisively, their choice already made before the question was asked. Others stood slowly pulled upward by the momentum of the men around them, making their decision in the act of standing itself. Within a minute, nearly every man in the room was on his feet. The sound of 300 men standing was not dramatic. It was quiet. Chairs shifting, boots scraping, the rustle of leather. But the quiet was the loudest thing Caleb had ever heard. Dutton remained seated. 2 men near him stayed seated as well. 3 abstentions out of more than 300. The count didn't matter. The answer was already written on every standing body in the room. Boone looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back. Something passed between them that didn't need words. Then Boone looked at his daughter. Sloan was still standing in the center of the room. She had done what she came to do. The case had been made. The vote had been taken. The outcome was decided, and she had done it all while standing on legs that should have been in a hospital bed, with stitches in her forehead and a baby 5 weeks from being born. Boone's eyes were bright. He nodded at her once. She nodded back. Then her knees buckled. Harlan caught her. He was across the room before her hand left her stomach, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size. He got his arms under her and held her upright, and Boone was there half a second later, and between the two of them, they got her to a chair, and someone produced a bottle of water, and someone else was already on the phone calling her doctor. "I'm fine," Sloan said, her voice thin now, the strength she had been projecting finally running out. "I just need a minute." "You need a hospital," Boone said. "I need to finish what I started." "It's finished. The vote's done." The vote was the easy part. She looked up at her father, even seated, even pale, even shaking slightly. From the effort of staying conscious, her eyes still had that sharpness, that clarity, that 3 steps ahead quality that Caleb had first seen in the gap beneath a demolished car. "We need to talk about Sykes, about what happens next, and I need to talk to Caleb." Boone looked at Harlan. Harlan looked at Sloan. Some silent communication passed between the three of them that Caleb couldn't read. "Not here," Boone said finally. "We do this at home, after you've eaten and rested." "Dad, that's not a request either." Sloan looked at him for a long moment. Then she almost smiled. "Fine," she said, "but Caleb comes with us." They brought Sloan to Boone's house. It was a single-story place on a quiet street, unremarkable from the outside, the kind of house that exists in every neighborhood in every town in Arizona. Tan stucco gravel yard, a truck in the driveway. The inside was clean and spare. Furniture that was solid but not new. Walls that had photographs on them but not many. A kitchen that smelled like coffee and motor oil, and the particular emptiness that comes from a house where someone used to cook and doesn't anymore. Caleb noticed the absence before he noticed anything else. There were gaps, small ones, a hook on the wall with nothing hanging from it, a shelf with a thin line of dust around the shape of something that had been moved. The kind of gaps that happen when someone leaves and the person remaining doesn't quite know what to do with the spaces they left behind. Sloane's mother had been gone 12 years, but the house still carried the outline of her presence like a photograph that has been removed from a frame. Sloan sat on the couch with a blanket over her legs and her arm in the sling and her phone on the cushion beside her. Boone made her eat soup. She ate half of it and set the bowl aside and picked up the phone. "Caleb," she said, "sit down. I need to ask you some things." Caleb sat in the armchair across from her. Boone stood in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame, close enough to hear but far enough to let Sloan lead. Harlan sat at the kitchen table behind him. The four of them arranged in a geometry that placed Sloan at the center. "That night," Sloan said, "before the ambulance came, before Harlan found you, what did the crash site look like from above?" Caleb thought about it. The car was on its side, against the barrier, steam coming from the engine, glass everywhere. "Did you see any other vehicle, a truck, anything parked on the shoulder or on the road?" "No, just the wreck. Tire marks on the asphalt. Not from the ambulance." "Before that?" Caleb closed his eyes. He put himself back on the shoulder of the highway, standing in the dark, looking down at the embankment. He had been focused on the car, on the sound, on getting down the slope. But his eyes had passed over the road surface on his way down. "There were marks," he said slowly. "2 sets. One from the car, going off the road, and another set, wider, heavier, like a bigger vehicle. They were further back, maybe 50, 60 yards before the spot where the barrier starts." Sloan leaned forward slightly. "2 sets of marks." "Yeah, I didn't think about it then. I was focused on getting to you." "But you saw them." "I saw them." Sloan looked at Harlan. "The police report says single vehicle accident. 1 set of tire marks. 1 vehicle. If there were 2 sets of marks on that road, the report is either wrong or it was written by someone who didn't look very carefully." "Or someone who was told not to look," Harlan said. The room got quiet. Sloan picked up her phone and opened a map application. She zoomed into a section of highway and turned the screen toward Caleb. "Show me where," she said, "exactly where you first saw the marks, and exactly where the car was." Caleb studied the map. He found the stretch of highway. He pointed to the approximate location. Sloan marked it with a pin. Then she asked about the direction of the tire marks, the width, the angle. She asked about glass patterns, fluid trails, the position of the car, relative to the barrier. She asked questions Caleb didn't know the answers to, and questions he was surprised to find he did know the answers to, details his eyes had collected without his brain consciously registering them. She built a picture, piece by piece, detail by detail, assembling the crash site from Caleb's memory the way a detective assembles a crime scene from evidence. When she was done, she had a map with 6 pins on it in a timeline that told a story very different from the police report. 2 vehicles, she said. The truck came up behind me, matched speed, then accelerated and made contact with my rear quarter panel. I lost control. The truck kept going. No braking, no hesitation. This was not someone who panicked. This was someone who had done something like this before or had been told exactly how to do it. Boone's jaw was set. His hands gripped the door frame. "Let me handle this," he said. His voice was low and controlled, but what it was controlling was visible to everyone in the room. "Give me Sykes and let me handle it." "No," Sloan said. "Sloan, Iwada, no." She said it with the same finality she had used in the chapel. No room for argument, no space for negotiation. "If you go after Sykes, you go to prison. If you go to prison, Ren grows up without a grandfather. I am not going to let that happen." "You keep saying that name," Boone said. "Ren." "It's her name," Sloan said. "I decided." Boone looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face. Then he asked the question that was waiting underneath all the others. "What do you want to do?" Sloan set her phone down. "I want to find out who sent Sykes. Because Sykes didn't do this alone. He's muscle. He's a tool. Someone pointed him at me and said, 'Go.' I want to know who." "How?" Harlan, Sloan said, turning to the kitchen table. "I need you to watch Sykes, not confront him, not follow him close enough to spook him. Just watch. Where he goes, who he meets, what his pattern is. Can you do that without being seen?" Harlan nodded once. "I can do that." 2 weeks, Sloan said. "That's all I need. 2 weeks of observation and I'll know who's behind this." Boone shook his head slowly, not in disagreement, in something closer to disbelief. "You're 19 years old," he said. "You should be thinking about the baby, about getting healthy, about your appointment next week, not about surveillance and federal case and taking down Dad." Sloan's voice was quiet. "Someone tried to kill your grandchild. I can think about more than one thing." The silence that followed had a different texture than the silences that had come before. It was the silence of a man recognizing that his daughter had become someone he needed to follow rather than lead. Boone held it for a long moment. Then he pushed away from the door frame and walked to the couch and sat down beside Sloan and put his arm around her, carefully mindful of the sling and the stitches and the baby and everything that was fragile and everything that wasn't. 2 weeks, Denise said, and then we talk again." 2 weeks, Sloan agreed. Caleb sat in the armchair and watched this and felt something shifting inside him that he couldn't name. Not jealousy exactly, something more complicated, the ache of witnessing something you've never had and didn't know you wanted until you saw it up close. A father and daughter sitting on a couch in a quiet house, disagreeing and trusting each other, and letting the disagreement exist without it breaking anything. He had never seen that before. He had never been in a room where people argued and stayed. Harlan drove Caleb back to the garage that evening. The ride was quiet. The sun was low and orange over the desert, throwing long shadows across the road. Harlan killed the engine in front of the garage and sat for a moment. "She's something, isn't she?" Harlan said. It wasn't really a question. "Yeah," Caleb said. "Her mother was the same way. Maeve died when Sloan was 7. Car accident. Different kind. Drunk driver ran a red light. Killed her instantly." Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. A car accident killed Sloan's mother, and a car was used to try to kill Sloan. The symmetry was too sharp to be coincidence. "Boone almost didn't survive it," Harlan continued. "Not the crash, the grief. He went to a place where nobody could reach him, stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped coming to chapel. For 3 months, this club ran on autopilot because its president was sitting in a dark room trying to figure out how to be alive without the woman who made him want to be." Harlan looked at the garage stairs. Sloan's the one who brought him back. She was 7 years old. She walked into that dark room and sat on his lap and said, "Daddy, I need you to make me dinner because I don't know how to use the stove." And that was it. That was the moment he came back. Because she needed him. And needing to be needed was the only thing strong enough to pull him out. Caleb didn't say anything. He just listened. So when she stands up in front of 300 men and tells them what to do, Harlan said, "That's not arrogance. That's a girl who learned at 7 years old that if she doesn't take charge, the people she loves fall apart. She's been holding this family together since she was too young to know what holding meant." Harlan started the engine. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, she's going to need your help building that case." The next 2 weeks moved in a rhythm Caleb had never experienced before. Structure, purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning that wasn't survival. He worked at the garage during the days. Mercer, the owner, was a quiet man in his 60s with grease permanently embedded in the lines of his hands and a way of teaching that involved pointing at things and grunting until Caleb figured out what to do. Mercer didn't ask questions about where Caleb came from or why he was here. He just gave him work to do and showed him how to do it and paid him at the end of each week in cash that Caleb folded and put in the drawer beside the bed in the room above the garage right next to the $14 he still hadn't spent. In the evening, Sloan called, always at the same time, always with questions. She was building the case the way Mercer built engines, piece by piece with patience and precision, and an understanding that rushing created mistakes, and mistakes created failures, and failures in this particular situation created consequences that would last the rest of all their lives. Caleb told her everything he remembered about the crash site, the angle of the car, the smell of the fluids, the width of the tire marks, details he didn't know he had noticed until she asked about them, details that surfaced from whatever place in the brain stores, things the conscious mind wasn't paying attention to. And while Caleb provided the pieces, Harlan provided the picture. He watched Sykes, carefully from a distance the way Sloan had instructed. He tracked Sykes's movements, where he ate, where he drank, where he met people, and who those people were. He reported everything to Sloan, and Sloan organized everything into a file that grew thicker every day. It was on the 11th day that the file revealed something that changed everything. Sloan called Caleb that night at the usual time, but her voice was different, tighter, more controlled, which for Sloan meant that whatever she was controlling was bigger than usual. "I need you to come to the house," she said. "Tonight. Harlan will pick you up." Caleb was there within the hour. Sloan was at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of her and her laptop open, and Harlan sitting across from her with an expression that Caleb had never seen on his face before. It looked like the expression of a man who has just discovered that the floor beneath his feet is not as solid as he thought. Boone was not in the room. "Where's your dad?" Caleb asked. "Sleep," Sloan said. "And he stays asleep. He doesn't hear this. Not yet." Caleb sat down. Sloan turned the laptop to face him and Harlan. On the screen was a series of photographs. Surveillance photos taken from a distance. Sykes meeting someone in a parking lot. The someone was a man in a suit, clean-shaven professional, completely out of place next to Sykes's bulk and roughness. "His name is Ray Kessler," Sloan said. Caleb didn't recognize the name, but Harlan did. Caleb saw it in the way Harlan's hands went flat on the table, the way his breathing changed, the way his eyes moved from the photograph to Sloan and back again. "That's not possible," Harlan said. "It's in the photos. 3 meetings in 11 days. Sykes reports to Kessler. Kessler gives instructions. Sykes executes." "Sloan, if you are saying what I think you're saying..." "Ray Kessler was my father's business partner," Sloan said. Her voice was flat, controlled in the way that meant the thing underneath it was enormous. "He was Dad's closest associate outside the club for 8 years. They ran the trucking contracts together, the legitimate side of the business. Kessler handled distribution, Dad handled operations. They split the revenue 50-50 until 3 years ago when Kessler wanted 70, and Dad said no, and Kessler walked away." She paused. "Kessler didn't walk away. He repositioned. And now he's using Sykes to send a message. Run me off the road. Hurt the president's daughter. Show Boone what happens when someone says no to Ray Kessler." The kitchen was quiet. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere in the house, Boone was sleeping, and his daughter was sitting at his kitchen table holding a piece of information that would either save his family or destroy it, depending on what happened next. "If my dad finds out it's Kessler," Sloan said, "he will kill him. I don't mean that as an expression. I mean, he will find Ray Kessler and he will end his life, and then he will spend the rest of his life in a federal prison, and my daughter will grow up visiting her grandfather through bulletproof glass on Saturdays. She looked at Harlan. That is not going to happen. Harlan met her eyes. He held them for a long moment. Caleb watched the two of them communicate in that silent language that exists between people who trust each other with things they can't say out loud. What do you need from me? Harlan asked. I need you to keep watching Sykes. I need more photos, more meetings, more evidence, enough to hand to a federal prosecutor and let them do what they do. But I also need you to swear to me right now that you will not tell my father about Kessler. Not until I'm ready. Not until the case is built and Kessler can't run. That's a big ask, Harlan said. I know what I'm asking. You're asking me to keep something from my president. I'm asking you to protect my president from himself. The words sat in the air between them. Harlan looked at the photographs on the laptop. He looked at Sloan. He looked at the hallway that led to the room where Boone was sleeping. If he finds out, I knew, Harlan said, and kept it from him, that's the end of everything between us. 20 years. Gone. If he finds out from you and kills Kessler, Sloan said, that's the end of everything for everyone. His freedom, my family, Ren's future, everything. Harlan was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. Until you're ready, he said. Not a day longer. Not a day longer, Sloan agreed. She turned to Caleb. He had been sitting there silent through all of it, watching, absorbing, trying to understand the weight of what he was witnessing. Two people making a decision to carry a secret that could break the person they both loved, because the alternative was letting that person break himself. Caleb, Sloan said, you heard all of this. I know. Can you keep it? He thought about the group home, about how secrets there were currency traded and sold and weaponized, about how he had learned to keep secrets, not because he was trustworthy, but because no one ever asked him to hold anything worth keeping. This was different. This was someone asking him to hold something that mattered, someone trusting him with weight. Yeah, he said, I can keep it. Sloan nodded. Something passed between them. Not gratitude exactly, recognition. The recognition of one person who has learned to carry heavy things alone, seeing the same capacity in someone else. Good, she said, because this is going to get harder before it gets easier. And I need people around me who can hold things without dropping them. Harlan drove Caleb back to the garage in silence. The desert night was cool, and the stars were scattered across the sky in patterns that hadn't changed in 10,000 years, and wouldn't change in 10,000 more. Caleb climbed the stairs to his room and sat on the bed and looked at the ceiling fan turning overhead. He thought about Sloan at the kitchen table with her papers and her photographs and her plan. He thought about the way she carried the weight of her father's rage and her family's safety and her unborn daughter's future all at once, without flinching, without complaining, without asking anyone to carry it for her. He thought about Dutton saying she was 19 years old as if age determined what a person was capable of carrying. And he thought about Harlan saying she had been holding her family together since she was 7. Somewhere out there, a man named Ray Kessler was going about his business, making his plans, moving his pieces, believing he was in control. He didn't know that the girl he had tried to kill was the most dangerous person in the room. He didn't know that she was building a case that would dismantle him without ever raising a fist. He didn't know that a 16-year-old kid with no phone and no plan had stopped on a dark highway and set into motion a chain of events that would end with Kessler's world collapsing around him. Kessler didn't know any of that yet, but Sloan did, and she was patient. And patience, Caleb was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous weapon anyone could carry. He pulled the blanket up and closed his eyes. The fan turned overhead. The $14 sat in the drawer beside the bed, and somewhere across town, Sloan was still awake, still working, building something patient and precise and invisible from the outside, the way you build a trap that only closes once. The days that followed had a shape to them that Caleb had never experienced before. He woke at 6. He showered. He ate breakfast standing at the counter because sitting down still felt like too much commitment to a place that might not be his tomorrow. He walked down the stairs and into the garage where Mercer was already working, already elbow deep in something mechanical, already pointing at tools and grunting. Caleb learned. He learned how to change brake pads and flush coolant systems and replace timing belts and diagnose engine problems by sound alone. Mercer taught the way certain men teach without lectures or explanation, just demonstration and repetition, and the occasional correction delivered as a single word. Wrong, again, tighter, good. The economy of Mercer's vocabulary forced Caleb to pay attention with his eyes instead of his ears, and he discovered that he was good at this. Good at watching. Good at reading the story a machine tells through the sounds it makes and the way its parts fit together. He fixed things every day. He fixed things that needed fixing and things that didn't. He reorganized Mercer's tool wall by size and function. He repaired a leak in the garage roof that had been dripping into a coffee can for what looked like years. He replaced the hinge on the side door that had been sagging so badly it scraped the concrete every time it opened. Small repairs, invisible repairs, the kind of work that nobody notices until it's done, and then they notice only that something feels different, feels better, feels right. And at the end of each day, he climbed the stairs to his room and tightened the screws on the ceiling fan that didn't need tightening. Because fixing things made the room his. Because every repair was a small act of belonging. Because a place where your hands have worked is a place that remembers you were there. Dutton came to the garage on the fourth day. He arrived without announcement, without greeting, without any of the social machinery that most people use to smooth the edges of an encounter. He just appeared in the doorway, big and bald, and wearing his vest, and stood there looking at Caleb with the same flat assessment he had delivered at the chapel meeting. "You, he said. "Come with me." Caleb looked at Mercer. Mercer shrugged. That was all the guidance Caleb was going to get. He followed Dutton to the back of the property where a shed sat behind a wall of dead brush. Dutton unlocked it. Inside was a storage disaster. Years of accumulated parts, tools, equipment, and debris piled floor to ceiling with no system and no logic. The kind of mess that happens when people throw things into a space and close the door and decide it's a problem for later. "Clean it," Dutton said. "Organize it. Everything sorted, everything labeled, everything in a place where a man can find it without digging." He turned and walked away. Caleb looked at the shed. It would take days, maybe a week. The space was dark and hot and smelled like motor oil and rust in the specific funk of things that had been sitting untouched for too long. He started working. He didn't complain. He didn't ask why. He didn't point out that this was clearly punishment, disguised as a task that Dutton was testing, him pushing him trying to find the breaking point where Caleb would quit or complain or give Dutton the excuse he needed to say he told them so this kid doesn't have what it takes. Caleb just worked. Hour after hour in the heat, sorting bolts from screws, separating good parts from scrap, building shelves from lumber, he found stacked behind the shed, labeling everything with a marker and tape. He worked until the light was gone and then came back the next morning and worked again. On the third day of cleaning the shed, Dutton came back. He stood in the doorway and looked at what Caleb had done. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he pointed at a shelf. "Those bearings are in the wrong order." Caleb looked. They weren't. They were sorted by size, smallest to largest, left to right, exactly the way any mechanic would want them. "They're sorted by size," Caleb said. "Sort them by frequency of use," Dutton said. "The ones we need most go at eye level." He turned and walked away again. Caleb resorted the bearings, and the filters, and the gaskets, every shelf reorganized not by logical category, but by practical use, which required him to learn which parts the garage used most often, which required him to pay attention, which required him to understand the work in a way that went beyond following instructions. It took him 2 more days. When he was finished, the shed was immaculate. Every part in its place, every shelf labeled, every surface clean. Dutton came back a final time. He walked through the shed, slowly running his hand along the shelves, checking the labels, pulling parts out and putting them back. He did this for 5 full minutes without speaking. Then he looked at Caleb. "You didn't quit," he said. "No. Most people would have." "I'm not most people." Dutton studied him. The same flat assessment, but something in it had shifted. Not warmth, not approval, something more like recalculation. The adjustment a man makes when the evidence doesn't match his expectation. He left without saying anything else. But he didn't come back with another impossible task. And Caleb understood that something had been settled between them. Not resolved, not finished, but settled. A foundation laid that could be built on or walked away from, and the choice of which was still being made. While Caleb cleaned sheds and sorted bearings, Sloan worked. She called every evening, always at 7, always with that same precise, controlled voice that told Caleb everything he needed to know about how much pressure she was carrying and how little of it she was willing to show. She had gone back to living at Boone's house. She rested when the baby demanded it and worked when the baby let her. She kept her father at arm's length from the investigation, feeding him just enough to satisfy his need to be involved, without giving him the peace that would set everything on fire. Kessler's name stayed locked between Sloan Harlan and Caleb, a secret held by 3 people who understood that the moment it escaped, everything changed. Harlan continued watching Sykes. The surveillance photographs accumulated. Meetings, phone calls, dead drops at gas stations and parking lots. Sykes was careful but not careful enough. He operated with the confidence of a man who believed the people he was working for were untouchable, and that confidence made him sloppy in ways that showed up in photographs. On the 14th day, Sloan called Caleb and said the words he had been expecting and dreading in equal measure. "I need you to do something." Her voice had the particular quality it got when she was about to ask for something significant. Not commanding, not pleading, just direct in a way that left no room for ambiguity. "Sykes knows there was someone at the crash site," she said. "The police report doesn't mention a witness by name, but Sykes isn't stupid. He knows someone stopped. He knows someone saw the wreck before the ambulance got there. He's been asking around. It's only a matter of time before he finds out it was you." Caleb felt something cold move through his chest. "So instead of waiting for him to come to you on his terms," Sloan continued, "we bring him to you on ours." "What does that mean?" "It means we let him find you. We make it easy. We let him show up at the garage and say whatever he's going to say and do whatever he's going to do. And we record every word." The silence on the phone was heavy. Caleb sat on his bed in the room above the garage and looked at the ceiling fan and thought about what she was asking. She was asking him to be bait. She was asking him to stand in the path of the man who had tried to kill her and let that man come to him. "The recording is the last piece," Sloan said. "I have photos of Sykes meeting with Kessler. I have Harlan's surveillance logs. I have your testimony about the tire marks. But I need Sykes on tape. I need him confirming what he did and who sent him. A federal prosecutor won't move on photographs alone. They need voice. They need intent. They need Sykes being stupid enough to threaten someone while a microphone is listening. And you think he will? I know he will. Sykes is the kind of man who talks too much when he thinks he's in control. He'll come to the garage. He'll try to scare you into leaving. He'll reference the crash. He'll reference Kessler without meaning to because men like Sykes need you to know who's behind them. It's how they feel powerful." "What if he does more than talk?" Sloan was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "You won't be alone. I'm arranging that tonight. Someone will be there. Close enough to step in if it goes wrong. You won't see them. Sykes won't see them, but they'll be there." "Who? Let me handle that." Caleb sat with this for a long time after Sloan hung up. He thought about saying no. He thought about the group home and all the times adults had put him in situations he didn't choose and expected him to survive them. He thought about how this was different, how Sloan had asked, not told, how she had explained why and trusted him with the reason, how she had said he wouldn't be alone. He picked up the phone and called her back. "Okay," he said, "tell me what to do." 3 days passed. Each one felt longer than the one before. Caleb went to work at the garage each morning and did his job and tried not to think about what was coming, and failed. The recording equipment was already in place. Sloan had arranged it through Harlan, a small device hidden in the workbench that looked like nothing and captured everything within 30 feet. The instructions were simple. Work normally. Don't look for the device. Don't look for the person watching. When Sykes shows up, stay calm. Let him talk. Don't provoke. Don't threaten. Don't lie. Just be 16 years old and scared, which wouldn't require much acting, because Caleb was in fact 16 years old and scared. Sykes came on a Tuesday night. Caleb was alone in the garage. Mercer had gone home at 6. The lights were on because Caleb had been working late on a transmission rebuild, one of the first jobs Mercer had trusted him to handle solo. His hands were covered in gear oil. The radio was playing something country and old, and the sound of it filled the garage with a warmth that made the space feel smaller and safer than it was. He heard the footsteps before he saw the man. Heavy boots on gravel, deliberate, unhurried. The kind of walk that announces itself on purpose. The gravel crunching in a rhythm that was too even, too controlled, the walk of someone who wanted you to hear them coming, because hearing them coming was part of the point. Caleb straightened up from the workbench and turned toward the garage door. Sykes stood in the opening. He was bigger than Caleb expected. Thick through the neck and arms, the build of someone who used his body as a tool and maintained it accordingly. His face was flat and wide and carried the specific blankness of a man who has learned to keep his expressions behind a wall. He wore a dark jacket over a dark shirt, and his hands were at his sides, and his eyes moved through the garage the way a predator's eyes move through a space, checking corners, calculating distances, identifying everything that could be used and everything that was in the way. He looked at Caleb the way a man looks at a problem he's been sent to solve. "You the kid," Sykes said. Not a question. Caleb's mouth went dry. Every muscle in his body screamed to run. His feet wanted to move, wanted to carry him out the back door and into the dark and down the road and away from here, because running was what he knew, running was what he was good at running was the thing that had kept him alive for 16 years. He didn't run. "Depends on which kid you're looking for," Caleb said. His voice was steadier than he expected. Sykes stepped into the garage. Each step was measured. He was taking inventory. The tools on the wall, the car on the lift, the exits, the space. Calculating. "The kid from the highway," Sykes said. "The one who found the girl in the ditch. That's you." Caleb didn't confirm or deny. He just stood there with gear oil on his hands and his heart hammering, and the recording device 3 feet away capturing every syllable. "You should have kept walking," Sykes said. He stopped 8 feet from Caleb, close enough to be threatening, far enough to suggest he wasn't finished talking yet. "That night on the highway, you should have been like the other 4. Should have kept your head down and kept moving and not gotten involved in something that had nothing to do with you." "A pregnant woman was trapped under a car," Caleb said. "That had something to do with everybody." "No." Sykes shook his head. "It had something to do with her father, and the debts he owes, and the people he's pissed off. She was a message. You weren't supposed to be part of it." There it was. Caleb felt the words land. She was a message. Confirmation. Intent. Purpose. Sykes had just told him that the crash was deliberate, that it was targeted, that it was designed to hurt Boone through his daughter. "A message from who?" Caleb asked. Sykes smiled. It was a thin mechanical thing, the kind of smile that was designed to frighten rather than express. "You don't need to know that. What you need to know is that the message wasn't received the way it was supposed to be. And the people who sent it aren't happy about that. And they're starting to wonder about the kid who showed up at the scene and is now living under the protection of the club." He took another step closer, 7 feet now. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack up your little room upstairs. You're going to take your backpack and your $14 or whatever you've got left, and you're going to walk back out onto that highway and disappear. You're going to forget everything you saw that night. You're going to forget the girl, forget the club, forget all of it. And if I don't..." Sykes reached into his jacket. Caleb saw the movement. His entire body locked up. His vision narrowed to the hand in the jacket and the space between them. Sykes pulled out a knife, not large, not theatrical, a working knife, the kind carried by men who use knives for things that don't get talked about afterward. He held it loosely at his side, not pointing it, not threatening with it, just letting Caleb see it. "If you don't," Sykes said, "then the people who sent me are going to start asking questions about you. Who you are, where you came from. And when they find out you're a 16-year-old runaway from a state group home with nobody in the world who gives a damn about you, they're going to understand that you're the kind of problem that disappears easy." Caleb couldn't breathe. The garage was suddenly too small, the walls too close, the air too thick. The knife caught the fluorescent light and reflected it in a thin silver line. He thought about running. He thought about Sloan's voice on the phone saying he wouldn't be alone. He thought about the recording device and the microphone and the fact that every word Sykes had just said was being captured, including the confession about the crash and the knife and the threat. He thought about 4 headlights passing in the dark and a girl counting them. "You don't know anything about me," Caleb said. His voice shook, but it held. Sykes stepped closer, 6 feet, 5. The knife came up, slightly not aimed, just present, just making sure Caleb understood what it was and what it meant. I know enough, Sykes said. I know you're a kid playing house with a bunch of bikers who are going to get bored of you the second you stop being useful. I know you've got no family, no future, and no reason to be standing here right now except stubbornness. And stubbornness is a real bad reason to die. 4 feet. Caleb could smell him now. Cigarettes and sweat and something metallic underneath. Then a voice came from the darkness behind the car on the lift. That's far enough. Sykes froze. His head turned toward the voice. And from behind the car stepped Dutton. He moved slowly the way a man moves when he wants you to see every inch of him and understand what each inch is capable of. He had been there the whole time. Behind the car in the shadows, silent, watching, listening, patient, in a way that only men who have spent decades in rooms like this can be patient. He had heard every word. He had watched the knife come out. He had waited until the exact moment when waiting was no longer an option, and then he had moved. Sloan had arranged it. Sloan had called Dutton. The man who had argued loudest against Caleb's protection was the one she had chosen to protect him. And Caleb understood why. It wasn't convenience. It wasn't punishment. It was strategy. Sloan knew that Dutton needed to see Caleb face something real and not run. She knew that the only way to change Dutton's mind was to put him in a position where Caleb's character was undeniable because Dutton had witnessed it with his own eyes. Dutton stopped 5 feet from Sykes. He was taller, wider, older, and his eyes held something that Sykes's didn't. The calm certainty of a man who has been in rooms like this before and walked out of every one. Put the knife away, Dutton said. Sykes looked at him, calculated. The blade moved slightly, but Dutton didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't do anything except stand there with his arms at his sides and his eyes locked on Sykes with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world and none of the fear. You don't want this, Dutton said quietly. Not here, not tonight. Sykes held for 3 more seconds. Then the knife disappeared back into the jacket. He stepped backward. Once. Twice. His eyes moved between Dutton and Caleb. This isn't over, Sykes said. It is for tonight, Dutton replied. Sykes turned and walked out of the garage. His boots crunched on the gravel. An engine started somewhere in the dark. Headlights appeared swept across the garage wall and disappeared. Then it was just Caleb and Dutton standing in the fluorescent light with the country radio still playing and the recording device still running and Caleb's hands shaking so badly he couldn't hold them still. Dutton looked at him. Caleb waited for whatever came next. An order, a criticism, a reminder that this was exactly the kind of trouble Dutton had warned about. Instead, Dutton said something Caleb didn't expect. You didn't run. Caleb looked at him. His voice was raw when he answered. I'm done running. Dutton held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. Just once, not approval, not welcome. Something more fundamental than either of those things. Acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of one person recognizing in another the thing they had been waiting to see. He walked to the workbench, found the recording device, and pocketed it. This goes to Sloan tonight, he said, so she'll know what to do with it. Then he did something that Caleb would think about for years afterward. He put his hand on Caleb's shoulder, the same spot where Boone had put his hand that first night at the hospital. The same weight, the same steadiness. You did good, kid, Dutton said. He let go and walked out into the night. Sloan had the recording by midnight. By the next morning, she had it transcribed, annotated, and integrated into the file that now contained 14 days of surveillance photographs, Caleb's testimony about the crash scene, Harlan's observation logs, and Sykes's recorded confession. She added a cover letter that laid out the case in language a federal prosecutor would understand and appreciate. Then she told Boone about Kessler. She did it at the kitchen table in the morning with coffee and sunlight and none of the dramatic staging that would have felt appropriate for a revelation of this magnitude. She put the file on the table and opened it and showed him the photographs of Sykes and Kessler meeting and told him what they meant. She laid out the timeline, the meetings, the money, the chain of command that started with Kessler's grudge over a business deal and ended with his daughter's car wrapped around a concrete barrier on a dark highway. Boone's reaction was exactly what she had predicted. His face went white, then red, then still. The stillness of a man whose anger has passed through the other side of itself and arrived at something colder and more permanent. His hands flat on the table began to tremble, not with weakness, with restraint. The physical cost of not standing up and walking out of the house and doing the thing every cell in his body was demanding he do. "How long have you known?" he asked. 11 days. "You kept this from me for 11 days. "Yes." "Why?" "Because if I told you 11 days ago, you would have found Kessler and killed him. And right now, you would be in a holding cell waiting for arraignment, and I would be sitting here alone." Boone stared at her. His hands were flat on the table the same way they had been at the chapel meeting, completely still, but the stillness was costing him something visible now. "You had no right," he said. "I had every right. He tried to kill me. He tried to kill your grandchild. This is my case, my body, my baby, my call." And Harlan knew. Harlan did what I asked him to do. He kept a secret from his president. He protected his president from a 25 to life sentence. There's a difference. The silence that followed went on for a long time. Caleb wasn't in the room for this conversation, but Harlan told him about it later, told him every word, because Harlan believed Caleb had earned the right to know how the story ended. Boone sat at that table for 20 minutes without speaking. Sloan sat across from him and let the silence exist. She didn't fill it. She didn't justify. She didn't apologize. She just waited the way she had waited under that car on the highway, with the patience of someone who understood that some things take as long as they take, and pushing only makes them take longer. Then Boone spoke. "What happens now?" Sloan slid the file across the table. "Federal prosecutors in Phoenix. I have a contact through a lawyer Harlan knows. They've already indicated interest. Sykes's recorded confession, combined with the surveillance evidence, gives them probable cause for conspiracy, attempted murder, and racketeering. Kessler's business records will do the rest. Once the feds move, Kessler's operation collapses and Sykes goes down with it." Boone looked at the file. He didn't open it. "And what do I do?" "You stay here. You stay clean. You be a grandfather." Something broke in Boone's face then. Not rage, not sorrow, something else. The expression of a man who has just been told by his daughter that her plan for his life is better than anything he would have planned for himself, and the humbling weight of knowing she's right. "You're your mother's daughter," Boone said. "I know," Sloan said. The federal case moved fast once it started. Sloan handed the file to the prosecutor and stepped back and let the machinery of the justice system do what it was designed to do. Sykes was arrested at a gas station on a Tuesday morning, cuffed against the hood of his own truck by 3 federal agents who had been waiting for him since dawn. He didn't resist. Men like Sykes only fought when they believed the odds were in their favor, and 3 federal badges changed the math permanently. Kessler was arrested 4 days later at his office. The photographs in the newspaper showed a man in a suit being walked out of a building in handcuffs, with an expression of genuine surprise, the look of someone who had believed he was untouchable right up until the moment the cuffs closed. The club watched this happen from a distance. No fingerprints, no involvement, no exposure. Sloan had designed it that way from the beginning. She had understood something that most people twice her age never learn. The most powerful move is not the one you make yourself. It is the one you arrange for others to make while you stand somewhere else, entirely clean and uninvolved, and impossible to connect to the outcome. Dutton came to the garage on the day of Kessler's arrest. He didn't say much. He stood in the doorway and watched Caleb work on a brake line for a few minutes. Then he spoke. "She asked me to be there that night," he said, "at the garage when Sykes came." Caleb stopped working and looked at him. "I asked her why me," Dutton continued. "Why not Harlan? Why not one of the younger guys? She said because I was the one who needed to see it. See whether you'd run." Dutton was quiet for a moment. "She knew you wouldn't. She knew it before I did. She put me in that room so I'd see it for myself, so I couldn't pretend anymore that you were just some kid who got lucky on a highway." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. "I was wrong about you," Dutton said. The words came out flat, factual, delivered with the same economy he applied to everything else. Not an apology, a correction, the acknowledgement of a man who valued accuracy more than pride. Then he turned and walked away. And Caleb stood in the garage with brake fluid on his hands and something expanding in his chest that felt like every locked door in his life opening at once. 5 weeks after the night on the highway on a Tuesday morning in early spring, Wren came into the world. She arrived a few days ahead of the due date, eager and impatient, which was not a surprise given who her mother was. The doctors had been monitoring Sloan closely, adjusting her care as the weeks passed, watching the baby's development with the particular attentiveness that comes when a patient's medical history includes being trapped under a demolished car while pregnant. The delivery room was ready. The team was prepared. What they weren't prepared for was the volume. Wren came loud and furious and completely certain of her place in things. The nurses said later that they had never heard a baby with that much opinion about being born. She announced herself to the world the way her mother would have, with absolute clarity and zero interest in making the experience comfortable for anyone else. Caleb was in the waiting room when the nurse came out. He stood up so fast he knocked his coffee off the arm of the chair, and it splashed across the tile in a dark spreading pattern that nobody cared about because the nurse was smiling. "Everyone's fine," the nurse said. "Mom and baby, both doing great." Boone, who had been pacing the length of the waiting room for 3 hours, stopped. He stood still for a moment. Then he laughed. A real laugh, full and deep, the kind that comes from relief so large it has nowhere to go but out. The sound filled the waiting room, and the men in it, Harlan and Mercer and Dutton and a dozen others, let it fill them too. They went in together. Boone and Caleb side by side, the way the nurse had called them that first night. "Both of you." Sloan was in the bed, exhausted all the way down to her bones, her hair damp against the pillow, her eyes half closed. But when they walked in, she opened them foully and looked at Caleb and smiled. Wren was against Sloan's chest, red-faced and outraged, a small, furious creature who had opinions about the temperature and the light and the general inconvenience of being outside the only home she had ever known. "You want to hold her?" Sloan asked. Caleb hesitated. "It's okay," Sloan said. "She should know you." He took Wren carefully. She was impossibly small, impossibly real. She weighed almost nothing and meant almost everything. She looked up at him with unfocused eyes and made a sound that might have been discontent or might have been the beginning of a conversation she would spend the rest of her life having. Caleb looked down at her and felt something in him go quiet and still and certain. The noise that had been running in the background of his life for as long as he could remember, the static of being unwanted and unseen and unnecessary, went silent. Not because someone told him he mattered, not because it was written in a file or declared in a vote, because he was holding proof, living, breathing, furious proof that one decision on one dark road had created something real. Boone stood in the corner of the room with his hands at his sides and his eyes filling up, slow and quiet and without apology. Then Sloan said something that broke the room open. "Her full name," Sloan said, "is Wren Josephine." Caleb's hands went still. The air went still. Everything went still. Josephine. That was his mother's name, his birth mother. The woman who had died when Caleb was 3 years old, whose face he couldn't remember, but whose name he carried in the deepest part of himself like a stone at the bottom of a river. The woman he had never told anyone about. Not the caseworkers. Not Lenora. Not the other kids at the group home. Not Harlan or Boone or Mercer or anyone. He had kept that name locked inside himself because it was the only thing he had that was purely his, untouched by the system, untouched by the world, untouched by the endless parade of adults who had managed his life without managing to know him. He looked at Sloan. "How?" The word came out broken. "Your intake file at the group home," Sloan said. Her voice was gentle now. The strategist was gone. The general was gone. What was left was a 19-year-old girl who had just given birth, holding the gaze of a 16-year-old boy who had saved her life and giving him something no one else could give him. Birth mother's name. It was in the records. "I had Harlan pull them 3 weeks ago." "You looked up my file." "I looked up your story. There's a difference." Caleb stared at her. Nobody had ever looked up his story. Caseworkers had looked up his file, which was a collection of dates and incident reports and placement records that described where he had been without capturing anything about who he was. Sloan had gone looking for something else entirely. She had gone looking for the beginning. Why? His voice was barely there. "Because the woman who gave you that name is the reason you exist. And you existing is the reason my daughter exists. Josephine made you. You made this possible." She paused. Her eyes were bright. Her name deserves to be carried by someone who will live long enough to hear it spoken every day, by someone who will grow up knowing that names matter and that the people they came from matter, and that the chain from one person to the next is the only thing in this world that can't be broken. Caleb's vision blurred. He blinked and felt something hot on his cheeks and realized he was crying for the first time in years. Not the silent, suppressed crying of a kid in a group home who has learned that tears change nothing. Real crying, the kind that starts in the chest and moves through the whole body and doesn't care who sees it because it is bigger than shame and older than pride. He held Ren against his chest and cried, and the baby, perhaps confused by the movement or perhaps understanding something that adults spend their whole lives trying to understand, went quiet against him and stayed quiet and let him hold her while he fell apart and put himself back together in a different shape than before. Boone crossed the room. He put his hand on the back of Caleb's neck. Harlan, standing in the doorway, looked away and pressed his fist against his mouth. Even Dutton, who had shown up at the hospital an hour ago without being asked, and who Boone had waved past the nurses without a word, was standing against the far wall, with his arms crossed, and had something in his expression that he would decide if anyone asked, but that everyone in the room could see. Later, much later, after the nurses had come and gone and Ren had been fed and measured and declared perfect in every way that medicine can measure perfection, Caleb walked out of the hospital into the morning sunlight. He stood in the parking lot and breathed the air and let the warmth of it settle on his skin. Harlan drove him back to the garage. The ride was quiet. When they arrived, Caleb climbed off the bike and stood at the bottom of the stairs. "Harlan," he said. "Yeah, thank you." Harlan looked at him for a moment. Then he did something he had never done before. He smiled. A real smile. The kind that changes a man's whole face and makes you understand that underneath the leather and the patches and the years of hard living, there is still a person who knows what it feels like to be moved by something good. "Don't thank me," Harlan said. "Thank the girl who thinks 3 steps ahead of everyone." He drove away. Caleb climbed the stairs to his room and sat on the bed and looked at the ceiling fan and listened to it turn, and knew with a certainty that reached all the way to the bottom of him that he was never going to leave this room. Not because he couldn't, because he didn't want to. Because this room with its working fan and its tightened screws and its drawer with $14 that he still hadn't spent was the first place in his life that felt like it was waiting for him to come back. In the weeks that followed, Caleb started studying for his GED. Sloan gave him the study materials. She had ordered them online 2 weeks before Ren was born, which meant she had been planning this before Caleb knew it was a possibility. That was Sloan, always building the next thing before anyone else knew it needed building. He worked at the garage during the days and studied at the kitchen table in his room at night, and visited Sloan and Ren on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Boone was there on those visits, always moving through his house, with a softness that looked strange on a man his size holding his granddaughter, with hands that had built things and broken things, and now cradled something so fragile that the world seemed to bend around her. The club didn't make Caleb a member. He was too young for that. But they made him something else, something that didn't have an official name, but that everyone recognized. Family adjacent, protected, seen. When he walked into the clubhouse with Harlan, men nodded at him. When he worked at the garage, members brought their bikes to him instead of taking them somewhere else. When Dutton passed him on the street, the big man inclined his head a fraction of an inch, and that fraction of an inch contained more acceptance than Caleb had received in 16 years of living. One evening after work, Caleb drove out to the stretch of highway where everything had changed. Mercer had lent him the truck. He parked on the shoulder and walked to the spot where the concrete barrier still showed the scar of the impact. The gravel on the embankment was undisturbed now. The wreck had been towed weeks ago. There was nothing left to show that anything had happened here except a scrape on concrete that would weather away in a few seasons and a dark stain on the asphalt that the rain hadn't quite managed to wash clean. He stood there in the fading light and looked at the road. The same shoulder, the same embankment, but nothing was the same. The boy who had stood here 5 weeks ago, with $14 and a split lip and electrical tape on his shoe, was gone. Not dead, not erased, but transformed in the way that only happens when a single moment divides your life into everything that came before and everything that came after. He thought about 4 headlights, 4 cars that came and went, 4 drivers who saw something wrong and decided it wasn't their problem and kept moving. He wondered what each of those drivers was doing right now, whether they had seen the news about the arrests, whether they had connected the wreck on the highway to the pregnant woman they had driven past, whether they thought about it at all or whether it had already been filed away in the part of the brain where uncomfortable memories go to fade. He thought about the one breath, the single breath where he had stood on the shoulder and almost kept walking. The breath where his brain had made its case for survival and self-preservation and not getting involved, and his feet had overruled the argument and moved toward the embankment before the rest of him had finished deliberating. He thought about what Harlan had said that first night. Once you know you matter, you can't unknow it, and it changes everything about how you move through the world. Caleb understood that now. He understood it in his hands, which had learned to fix things, in his chest, which had learned to stay instead of run, in the $14 still sitting in the drawer beside his bed, unspent and unneeded, kept not because they were useful, but because they were proof of where he had been and how far he had come. The $14, the electrical tape, the group home, the split lip, the fluorescent light, the broken fan. All of it had been exactly what it needed to be to put him exactly where he needed to be on the exact night he needed to be there. Every small indignity, every forgotten birthday, every night lying awake watching a fan that didn't turn, all of it was the road, and the road had led him here. And the road had given back more than he had ever thought to ask for. Not a home exactly, but something close, something real. Something built not from walls and roofs, but from the decisions people make about each other in the dark. The decision to stop, the decision to stay, the decision to look at someone who has nothing and see someone who is worth everything. He stood on the highway and watched the last light drain from the sky and felt the desert cooling around him. A car passed, then another. Their headlights swept across him and kept going, and Caleb watched them disappear and thought about how easy it is to keep driving and how hard it is to stop, and how the difference between the two is sometimes the difference between everything and nothing. Then he got in the truck and drove back to the garage. He climbed the stairs. He opened the door. The ceiling fan was turning. The $14 were in the drawer. The screws were tight. The bed was made. He was home.